A homemade one-way valve. He saved his life.
He's strange. He's a genius. He's autistic. Would you want him treating you? That's the provocative question behind The Good Doctor, the new ABC series. And tonight, we're scrubbing in to find out with real-life good doctors with disabilities. Good evening. I'm Elizabeth Vargas here in a trauma bay in a major American hospital, a place none of us ever hopes to be, a place where we hope we'll have the best doctor possible taking care of us. But what if that doctor can't see or hear or walk? You're pretty tall.
I thought there's no way I can stand at an operating room table.
Would you feel comfortable trusting that doctor with your life? Have you ever had a single patient tell you, I don't want you treating me? What about a doctor forced to improvise?
Can't be back here.
Oh, I need a knife.
For this doctor, that's just another day at the office on Mount Everest.
World 2.
What's that?
World 2.
Saving a climber's life with whatever she had on hand or foot.
Were you just making it up as you were going? We gotta throw everything at this guy, he's gonna die.
Tonight, you're going to see that sometimes the smallest differences can make all the difference. The Good Doctors, Brilliance, and Bravery, a special edition of 2020.
I need to get to San Jose St. Bonaventure Hospital.
He's a hero unlike any other.
It changed.
Dr. Sean Murphy,
The boy's ECG changed.
a brilliant visionary surgeon
Lower amplitude means lower voltage.
who just happens to have autism and savant syndrome.
The veins in the boy's left arm are popping.
His condition leads to strokes of medical genius,
His heart, it's his heart.
His heart is fine.
but also moments of awkwardness and alienation.
Behave yourself, or you'll be removed from the building.
Then there's the skepticism and prejudices of a hospital's board and staff.
And you generally thought that this board wouldn't reasonably have any doubts about hiring a surgeon who's been diagnosed with autism.
Yes, he has autism, but he has spatial intelligence, and he sees things and analyzes things in ways that we can't even begin to understand.
This may be the first time a doctor with a severe disability is the lead of a primetime drama, but it's certainly not the first time such a doctor has put on scrubs in real life. Imagine if your doctor couldn't see. Dr. Tim Cordes of Wisconsin is blind, but he's able to identify irregular heartbeats without a stethoscope because of his advanced hearing. What if your doctor couldn't hear? Dr. Philip Zazov of Michigan is deaf, but he's able to use a stethoscope because he's hypersensitive to vibration. He also reads lips to communicate.
This locks in the knees. They're both locked in place.
Or how would you react if you thought your surgeon was unable to stand over the operating
I have a
table?
belt in here which keeps my...
Before you answer, meet Dr. Chris McCullough of the Morristown Medical Center in New Jersey. Wow. His $20,000 standing wheelchair is a feat of engineering. Well, I didn't know, Chris, but you're pretty tall.
I'm 6'3", which actually that becomes more of a challenge.
Enabling this third-year general surgery resident to do something so remarkable, only a handful of paralyzed doctors in the country can do it. Stand.
So how many times a day do you do this?
5, 6 times a day.
Chris had always wanted to be a surgeon, but his medical career was almost over before it began.
I had already been accepted to medical school.
What happened?
I was standing up from being seated at my desk, and I slipped, and my whole body went up, and I came crashing down, 6'3", 200 pounds of me on the edge of a thick glass coffee table. My head snapped backwards, and I broke the vertebra in my neck. I knew when I couldn't move my legs that something was wrong. In the back of my mind, I was yelling, please don't let me be paralyzed, I'd rather be dead.
Really? You actually thought that?
Oh yeah, I thought my life was over.
The one-time avid skier underwent months of rehabilitation, strengthening his body, rebuilding his resolve.
When I got to rehab, they said, you're probably never going to walk again. And I said, oh, they don't know what they're talking about.
Chris made it through medical school and eventually learned that his so-called disability actually plays to his advantage.
He comes into the room at a level that's more at the patient's level. They can see him and they can speak with him.
You mean at literally?
Eye level, right, because, and that helps a lot.
In fact, one study suggests patients perceive doctors to be giving them more quality time when the doctor is sitting during consults instead of standing.
with
So
him.
you think the fact that he's lower actually really helps?
I think that the fact that he's lower and a lot of it is his innate personality.
But right now, it's all about Chris's skill as a surgeon, not his bedside manner. We watch as he heads in to assist on a double mastectomy, supported by his hydraulic wheelchair.
It levels the playing field. I can get to everybody's level and get to the table just like everybody else. I don't want to be treated any differently than anybody else or ask for any different accommodations or ask for anyone to do things differently.
So this thing allowed your dreams to come true?
It did. It absolutely did. You look a lot better than you did last week. I think it certainly gives me the opportunity to connect with patients. They look and they can see very visibly that I've been in the bed. I know what it's like.
You're a nice kid, and you're obviously very smart. But you don't belong here.
How many times was that said to you?
Oh, more than I can count.
Tyler Sexton's journey from patient to doctor has been one long uphill battle. He suffers from spastic diplegia. It's a form of cerebral palsy, a chronic neuromuscular condition that affects balance as well as movement below the waist.
Good morning, Mrs. How are you?
But his condition affects more than his legs. Did the disease also affect your eyes?
There's no visual impairment at all, but there's a lazy eye, is the common term, so yes.
An obstacle that has tripped up this good doctor since he was born 6 weeks premature.
The doctor called us in and he said he will definitely be physically disabled and may never get out of a wheelchair. He will probably be mentally disabled.
Doctors would tell me that I wouldn't amount to anything, that I could sharpen pencils for a living. I could tell you numerous stories.
Doctors told you that?
Yes.
When Tyler was 3, he got his first walker, but he still had trouble keeping his balance. You broke bones because you fell so much.
Correct.
As a kid.
I've broken almost every bone in my body, major bones, from knees to wrists to ankles, all my fingers. I used to fall about 4 to 6 times a day.
But instead of giving up, he kept getting up. Needing help with his own 2 legs, he turned to someone with 4. Right. This is Danny, Tyler's service dog.
So you're using his body weight to keep yourself from falling?
Correct. The way I walk my body is it goes back and forth. So if I use him as a counterbalance, it keeps me a little more controlled so I can go slow, go up and down stairs, things like that.
Tyler says there were years growing up when the teasing was relentless.
It got so bad, I would pretend that I was blind, and nobody would mess with the blind guy.
Tyler says he could handle the taunts from other kids, but the discouragement from adults is what threw him off balance.
I had an interview at this medical school, and he looked at me and said, "You will never be a doctor." And I said, "Why?" He said, "Because they won't come to you."
Did you start to rethink your commitment to becoming a doctor?
I will tell you that I was broken.
Broken but not beaten, he applied to a dozen medical schools in the United States. Despite having straight A's, every single school rejected him. Still, he refused to accept that patients would shun him. He just needed that degree. You did manage to get into a medical school outside the country.
I did. I went to the University of St. Eustatius School of Medicine on an island of Statia.
A small medical school in the middle of the Caribbean. Tyler graduated in 2011 and was surprised when a hospital back in the States was willing to take him on for his residency. The kind of support Dr. Sean Murphy finds in The Good Doctor.
We hire Sean, and we make this hospital better for it. We hire Sean, and we are better people for it.
I could give you a list of the doctors that did believe in me, the good doctors.
How in the world medical schools passed on him is beyond comprehension. That's a shame because they missed out on a rock star.
Now the head of pediatrics at a hospital in Mississippi, Tyler says most of his patients are kids with special needs of their own. They've never objected to a doctor with a service dog. And as for those college advisors who told him people would not want him as their doctor, have you ever had a single patient tell you, "I don't want you treating me"?
Never, not once. Matter of fact, they asked for me.
Without Dr. Sexton, we don't know where we'd be. We were so grateful to find him. Dr. Sexton is a pediatric god.
To make his young patients feel at ease, he wears superhero t-shirts.
Do you have one of those t-shirts on every single day?
Every day. And I teach kids that there's something special and that they're super. We're all handicapped. Mind the world can see, but we're all struggling with something. And my disability gives me credibility.
Next, he can turn an airline terminal into a makeshift OR. She can do the same on the side of Mount Everest, saving a life.
I felt like he's gonna die.
With make-do medicine.
We used Viagra.
Viagra when we come back.
Edition of 2020. Once again, Elizabeth Vargas.
When a fluke airport accident nearly takes a young boy's life, Dr. Murphy springs into action.
Excuse me?
With no available surgical tools, he's forced to rely on what he can find. A box cutter for a scalpel, some duty-free bourbon for sterilization, and plastic tubing and a bottle fashioned into a pump, saving the boy from a collapsed lung.
He saved his life.
That singular skill is known as improvised medicine, and Dr. Luann Freer is one of the few real-world physicians who make it their practice.
There are just a handful of us physicians who find this great challenge, and it's just a real turn-on to be able to MacGyver, you know, a way to deal with an emergency, how to get somebody better when you don't have all the equipment.
Here at Mount Everest, the world's tallest and deadliest mountain, known to locals as Goddess Mother of the World, sits a tented clinic so isolated, medical improvisation is a must. Dr. Luann Freer has acquired the skills of a virtuoso. Freer, a wilderness enthusiast, launched this place 14 years ago. It sits nearly 18,000 feet high on the side of the mountain, and it's open 2 months each spring when hundreds of people come from around the world to try and summit Mount Everest. In her time, Freer has fashioned a stretcher from coiled rope and a tarp. She set broken bones with trekking poles.
Too much pain?
She's even extracted teeth with pliers from local Sherpa guides.
Yeah, it's pretty rooted in there.
But it's the visiting climbers who usually need the most serious attention. This is a deadly, and has been a deadly, adventure for many people.
Tragedies happen every year. Our bodies are not designed to live in this austere environment. There's no oxygen, you know, the conditions are brutal.
So brutal that nearing the 29,029-foot summit, oxygen ceases to exist. It's an area called the death zone. By far the greatest risk to climbers is high-altitude pulmonary edema, or HAPE. Reduced oxygen in the air causes some blood vessels in the lungs to dangerously constrict. The pressure causes those vessels to leak, filling the airways with blood, making breathing difficult, even impossible. But perhaps Dr. Freer's greatest MacGyver episode happened when she crossed paths with Joe and Liz Hughes. Avid mountaineers, the couple met while climbing a mountain in South America, though they deny it was love at first height.
No. It was friendship. It was a kindred spirit. You're doing something that's very dangerous. We watched out for each other.
Both were experienced climbers. They felt like they were destined to be together, though it also seemed they would never hear little footsteps behind them.
So you didn't even think you could get pregnant?
No, it wasn't supposed to be in the cards for me.
But conquering Mount Everest was, and the couple vowed to do it as a team.
It can be the most incredible experience, but it's also a killer. People die there.
Yes.
Were you fully aware of the risks? Did it make you give it a second thought at all?
Of course, there's always, you know, doubt and some fear, but I was up for the challenge and I was ready to do it. So
you gamed the risks and figured out this is worth the risk.
It's worth the risk.
After 6 months of intensive training, they set off in the spring of 2004. Their plans quickly went awry.
When was the first time you met them?
They came to meet me because they were concerned because Liz kept getting dizzy and passing out.
What did you think as you examined her and talked to her?
I thought, well, we better just make sure that you couldn't be pregnant, because pregnancy can cause you to feel a little bit dizzy and woozy.
She diagnosed me pregnant on the mountain.
And you had no idea?
No idea. And it shocks me to this day to even think about it. Yeah.
Wow.
The news, thrilling. The timing, not so much. About to be a mother, Liz knew this climb of a lifetime was over.
Did you tell her she should descend immediately?
I did. We both cried a little bit.
Joe was so overjoyed, he proposed on the spot.
I said, do you want me to come? And she was like, no, I can't let this stop your life stream.
As Liz headed home to the States, Joe pushed on, scaling 21,000 feet up the side of Mount Everest. 8,000 more to go before he can claim victory. Along the way, he'd been making recordings for students back home who were following his Everest adventure.
For the past 4 days, we've been sitting in base camp. It feels like forever. When you sit, you get weaker. Your muscles start to get tight.
Now, suddenly feeling weak, he made what would be his last dispatch.
But I dig deep. I pushed so hard that I collapsed. And this morning, all I want to do is sleep.
All of a sudden, I'm feeling like I can't breathe. I'm feeling tired. I feel like I'm working hard. But in my mind, I'm climbing Mount Everest. You're supposed to feel like this.
A film crew on the mountain turns its lens on Joe, who can no longer walk without help. Tantalizingly close to the summit, his lifelong dream slips away as an emergency call goes out.
American climber Joe Hughes has to be helped and often carried down over 5,000 vertical feet, passing through the treacherous Khumbu icefall.
We got reports from other climbers who passed him on the icefall and said, boy, this guy doesn't look very good.
Fearing the worst, Luann sends Sherpas with a stretcher to help bring Joe down the mountain.
Coming at you, Luann.
Blood is beginning to flood Joe's lungs. His life is slipping away. But instead of being wheeled into a hospital, he's being carried into a tent. It will require the daring improvisational medicine of Dr. Freer and a big dose of good fortune for Joe to make it home alive. Stay with us.
When he was 14 years old, he was, and he still is, an extraordinary young man. Yes, he has genius-level skills. He sees things, analyzes things in ways that we can't begin to understand. Yes, he has autism.
From the creator of House.
You saved his life. Who are you?
I'm Dr. Sean Murphy.
The Good Doctor. Series premiere Monday, September 25th on ABC.
Morning, sunshine.
Who are you?
I'm a messenger from God. You've been chosen to save the world.
Oh.
You have a sacred mission. I'm here to guide and protect you. We got work to do.
I want to know what the hell's going on. Tell me the truth.
The truth is, I'm not a good person. I'm getting a second chance.
Kevin Probably Saves the World. Series premiere Tuesday, October 3rd on ABC.
Joe Hughes never thought he'd be here, inside of a clinic on the face of Mount Everest, suffering from high-altitude pulmonary edema, with his new fiancée and unborn child waiting for him to come home.
The call stopped, and I was trying not to think the worst.
There's only one person who can save him, Dr. Luann Freer, and from her makeshift Everest ER, she's about to give a master class in medical improvisation, all documented by a film crew.
What was his condition when he finally did arrive?
He was gravely ill. He was blue, he was gasping to breathe. You could hear the bubbling in his chest without a stethoscope because blood is literally leaking in.
Cooling in his own lungs.
In your lungs, yeah.
And you can eventually drown.
Right. People drown in their own blood, and it's the most common cause of death at high altitude.
Now Dr. Freer is scrambling to figure out what to do, and the situation is becoming more dire by the moment.
Get more O2.
What's that?
More O2.
He was the closest to death I've ever seen of somebody with high altitude pulmonary edema.
What's the normal treatment for it?
High flow oxygen will help reverse the process. Unfortunately, in austere settings, you don't have unlimited oxygen.
What kind of medications did you give him?
We gave him everything I could think of that would decrease the blood pressure in the lungs.
Her skills pushed to limits even Dr. Sean Murphy would find daunting.
Were you just making it up as you were going?
A little bit. At that point, I felt like we got to throw everything at this guy. He's going to die.
The answer, a little blue pill that's come to many a man's assistance.
We used Viagra.
Viagra?
Yeah. Viagra was first developed as a medication to decrease blood pressure in the lungs.
Oh, really?
And then its more lucrative side benefit became known.
In this situation, Joe needs a pill every 6 hours.
Did it work?
It did.
Somebody might ask you, why did you have Viagra on Mount Everest?
We had it specifically for that, because we knew we had limited supplies of oxygen.
But there was still the matter of Joe's severe dehydration. He urgently needs IV fluids. And in the 0-degree spring temperatures of Everest that night, that's a tall order, especially when the tent's power generator briefly goes down.
How did you keep the IV liquids from freezing?
That's been something that took me a couple of years to figure out. This is the fluid. We've just warmed it up in a pan of hot water, and it's nice and warm. But the problem is it's going to freeze in this tubing.
Yeah.
And we want to minimize the heat loss. So what we improvised is putting it through the sleeve of a friend.
Oh, so then the tubing runs along their body.
Right. Everybody's wearing down jackets, and why not use all this body heat that's trapped in the down jackets?
The IV had worked, but Joe wasn't out of danger yet.
I turned around to his expedition leader and I said, start working on a helicopter. He needs to go to somebody who treats pulmonary edema.
As night turns to day, Joe desperately needs to get to a hospital. But a helicopter rescue at that altitude is impossible. The air is too thin. So Sherpas must improvise as well. On Dr. Freer's request, they take turns carrying Joe 5,000 feet down the mountain, where he can be safely flown to the nearest hospital before returning to Liz.
I've told Luann many times I'd be raising my daughter alone if it wasn't for her.
His life had been spared that night on the deadly mountain by the heroics of a savvy, quick-thinking wilderness doctor, unafraid to think out of the box.
What she was able to do and what she was able to come up with is not part of medical training. That's instinct. That's on par with the ability to rescue a soldier.
9 months later, the Hughes family had a chance to express its appreciation.
You named your daughter after the woman who saved your life.
Absolutely.
Tara Luann is now a spirited 12-year-old. She's grown up immersed in the folklore of her parents' journey to Mount Everest, hoping one day to have the chance to embrace her namesake.
I think I'm going to be lost for words because it's going to be my first time seeing the woman who saved my dad's life and who told my mom that she was pregnant with me.
And last week, we brought everyone together.
We have a little something that we want to show you. This is your name.
Oh, wait, what? Oh, my. Oh, wow. Oh, I'm so surprised. Come here, you. Oh.
Thank you.
I love you guys.
I love you, Doc.
Wow. Yep. This is my little family.
Next, childhood tragedy turned Sean Murphy into a doctor. Her sister's tragedy turned Debbie Yee into one too.
She was hit by a train.
But you won't believe the bizarre coincidence that happened later in the ER.
Elizabeth Vargas.
Intrathoracic pressure, pericardial effusion, echocardiogram.
Who is this guy?
Yes, Dr. Sean Murphy is different.
There.
Looks normal to me.
It's not normal. There's a concave deformity in the right atrium.
But in another sense, he's exactly like so many others, compelled to pursue a career in medicine by the pain of searing personal tragedies.
The day that the rain smelled like ice cream, my bunny went to heaven.
First the loss of his beloved pet, then his beloved brother.
The day that the copper pipes in the old building smelled like burnt food, my brother went to heaven. Neither one had the chance to become an adult. And I want to make that possible for other people.
The way Murphy reveals his motivation is dramatic, but channeling personal tragedy into professional choice is, in fact, not all that unusual.
My inspiration to become a physician assistant is actually my brother, Jesse Peets. In 2005, he was stricken with viral meningitis.
So when I was 13 years old, I was at a family event where my cousin's husband suddenly collapsed in front of us in the living room.
My father was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer, and before my dad passed away, he told me that he thought I had a gift for nursing, and he told me that I had healing hands.
But of all the stories we heard from around the country, the career of Dr. Debbie Yee follows a path like no other. Today, she's an emergency room doctor at University of California, San Francisco. The personal and painful history that got her here began here 14 years ago. Debbie was sharing a New York City apartment with her sister and best friend, Christine. Debbie had recently been working as an investment banking analyst when she got some terrifying news.
My sister Christine was in a terrible accident. She was hit by a train, a subway train in New York. She tripped on the subway platform and landed in the area between two subway cars, and the train began to drive away, and she was still in the track.
Her heart stopped at one point.
Yes, her heart stopped. She stopped breathing, and a surgical intern provided breaths to her and brought her back to life.
Dr. Tony McLaurin was the orthopedic surgeon on call. When Christine arrived, her right leg was completely shattered below the knee.
She had an injury that we sort of refer to as a mangled extremity. It tells you that not only is the bone broken, but there's also been significant damage to the skin, as well as to the, the muscles surrounding the bone.
What do you remember about the accident that day?
Fortunately, I don't actually remember very much. I remember leaving my office that day. And the next thing I remember is being in the dark, in a lot of pain, and someone calling out to me, telling me that help was on the way.
It was after her surgery, and she asked me why she felt like she couldn't wiggle her toes.
What did you tell her?
I think that there's no room for sugarcoating things in times like this. And I told her, you were in a terrible accident, and you lost your leg.
That had to have been devastating.
I think I was on a lot of medication. And I said, it's okay, my legs weren't that long anyway.
You made jokes?
Yeah. I didn't realize how hard it would be at the time. I was just happy that I was alive.
The next 5 weeks were a blur of surgeries, 15 in total, many aimed at saving her knee.
If you had lost that knee, what impact would that have had?
The prosthetic leg for an above-knee amputee, it doesn't always work. So it was a huge deal for me to keep my knee.
When discharge day finally came, Christine was happy to leave the hospital. Debbie, however, had decided to spend her life in one.
After my sister's accident, I realized I have a greater purpose in life.
Debbie decided to become a doctor, like the ones who saved her sister.
Emergency, this is Debbie.
You not only chose medicine, but you chose trauma.
Any chest pain or trouble breathing?
Why choose that particular path?
I remember the first time an ambulance came pushing through into the emergency room. I remember that feeling I had. I felt like I was reliving what it was like to be in the emergency room when my sister arrived.
Day 91.
During her residency in New York, the ABC medical documentary New York Med followed Dr. Yee.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
As she tended to a patient who'd been shot.
Can you squeeze my hand for me, honey? Good.
Saved a man who'd been attacked by someone wielding a machete.
He just came attacking me. We'll take a look at it. We'll get you better, okay?
And treated a woman whose pregnancy was in danger.
Did you actually pass out today?
Yeah.
Okay. This is why we go into emergency medicine. I've seen, probably 4,000 patients now. How you feeling? You look so much better.
It looks a lot better.
Without fail, whenever I have a patient like this, I will be smiling for the rest of the night.
Then a stunning coincidence.
Debbie, what is it? Train versus human being.
Dr. Yi urgently called to treat a patient with traumatic injuries from a subway accident.
It's about to become a storm because we just activated trauma.
What was that like for you in that moment?
For his own safety and because of his exam, we intubated him.
To actually have a patient come into the emergency room with injuries so similar to what your sister experienced.
When I saw that patient, I knew that I had to take my best care of the patient, and the patient had to live.
He's lucky, he's very lucky he's alive.
Her sister's accident continues to define Debbie, to drive her.
I want to provide the best for my patients, and I consider that to be my thank you to the medical staff who took care of my sister.
Yet for Christine, a different choice, a determination to put her pain in the past. That's Christine furiously spinning beside me at her favorite spinning class, her prosthetic leg not slowing her down a bit.
Christine, look at you. You're just crushing the whole board.
Through all the blood, sweat, and tears, the sisters' bond is unbroken. Life moves forward. The wheel keeps spinning. Next, Dr. Murphy breaks the rules. So did these doctors in a war zone, risking their lives to operate on a human bomb.
Boom! In his abdomen, in this area right here, was the shaft of the rocket, and the fins were sticking out over here.
When we come back. A sunny spring day in eastern Afghanistan. The soldiers of Alpha Company head out on patrol. Private Channing Moss is on board, manning a gun in a Humvee. This is Taliban country.
There's danger zones all over the place.
Sergeant Eric Wynn is in Moss's Humvee. The convoy enters a narrow stream bed surrounded by higher ground.
Then you just hear a pop.
Oh man, we're under attack. We just got ambushed.
Bullets turn to rocket-propelled grenades, rockets the size of baseball bats, with high explosives on one end and tail fins on the other, traveling as fast as a bullet. That is what is now raining down on Alpha Company.
I saw the first rocket hit a truck in front of me. Just a trail of smoke and fire, and you could hear it just barreling through the air. Then you heard the boom.
The convoy is in trouble. A pickup truck is burning. 2 Afghan soldiers are dead. 2 others seriously wounded. Escape is critical.
I'm like, get out of the kill zone. Right when I said, get out, is when we got hit. Well, I didn't even finish my sentence.
3 rocket-propelled grenades hit the Humvee.
It felt like one huge blow.
One punches through the windshield.
I got slammed up against the truck, and I went to go return fire again, and then I smelled something smoking, and I looked down, and I was smoking.
I look at him to tell him to turn the gun toward where we're getting shot at. And that's when I noticed Mosh, he has a tail fin sticking out of his side.
I was scared, so I was screaming.
Even a battle-hardened soldier would have been shaken at the sight of Moss, impaled with a 3-foot rocket designed to explode on impact, killing anyone within 30 feet.
I looked at him straight in his eyes like, I don't want to die like this.
Calls for help have reached the chopper pilots at a nearby medevac base.
I was just like, is the bird coming? So I thought I was going to tap out.
Then Moss hears the sound of help from above. The rescue chopper has finally arrived. For the first time, the crew sees Moss and those rocket fins.
In his abdomen, in this area right here, was the shaft of the rocket, and the fins were sticking out over here.
Army policy states they are not supposed to transport him. Moss is a human bomb. But if they leave him, he will most certainly die. So today, they throw out the rules and try and save a life.
He's possibly bleeding to death internally. He's in shock. We had to get out of that situation and get to a hospital where they could do surgery on him.
They all know the risks, death, injury, maybe even court-martial, but they also know they are taking Moss very gently, RPG and all. In this corner of the war against Afghanistan, the frontline Army Field Hospital is at best makeshift with limited medical resources. Bringing in a human bomb is strictly forbidden, but none of that matters now.
Dr. O said, we're staying. We're going to try to save his life.
In a rare medical pairing, surgeons Major Kevin Kirk and Major John O are joined by explosives expert Sergeant Dan Brown.
And I said, okay, we're on the same page then.
Did you ever for a moment think, holy cow, this guy is alive?
That's the first thing. I was like, I didn't use holy cow, but I used a few other choice words. I was like, he's still alive, and the doctor's like, yeah.
Once in the OR, they discover what has been buried inside of Moss for more than an hour. Exposed in this X-ray, doctors and Brown are relieved by what they don't see. The deadliest part of the RPG, the main explosive charge, is not in Moss.
So I was like, okay, this is a good thing. I said, the warhead's not there. They're like, good. I said, well, not all the way.
What is in Moss is a smaller explosive, the primer used to detonate the grenade. And if it goes off, it'll kill Moss and maim anyone nearby.
So it means we won't die, we'll just lose our hands. And they kind of looked at me and said, we're surgeons, right? I was like, yeah.
I knew that if we didn't just get this thing out, he was gonna die. Whether it took fingers off or not, we had to get this thing out.
The surgeon and the sergeant forge a bond, both realizing they are in uncharted territory. They would have to rely on instinct for this one.
I would have rather had Sergeant Brown than 50 other surgeons in that room at that moment, because he was the right guy to help me. And every time he'd leave, I felt like my security blanket had gone away.
And here are the stunning images documenting the actual surgery. In an act of medical brilliance and bravery, the good doctors reach inside Moss, steadying the still lethal rocket inches from the soldier's beating heart.
Almost there, about 3 more inches.
Using a hacksaw, Sergeant Brown gently saws off the fins and eases the rocket out.
You feed it, I'm holding.
With the detonator aimed at his own body.
Almost there, about 3 more inches.
What his theory was that if it had detonated, then it would have detonated into his flak vest.
There we go, we're clear. All right.
Sergeant Brown took it.
And carefully walked out?
He walked out at a smart pace.
Once outside, Brown takes the rocket to a bunker and detonates it.
It was the loudest sound in my whole life, and just relief. Private Moss is alive because of that.
I sat on a couple pallets outside the aid station, took my vest off, that I started shaking. I knew I did everything I could to help him live. And that was just very, very intense for me after the fact.
I was given a second chance, and to whom much is given, much is expected. So a lot is expected of me.
He was American, he was a soldier, he was a brother, and he was one of us. And there was nothing going to stop us from doing what we knew what we had to do.
Next, the military man who became a medical man. From Iraq to Harvard.
My name is Gregory Galeazzi. I was a captain in the United States Army, and I'm now a first-year medical student at Harvard Medical School.
Greg Galeazzi's transformation from good soldier to good doctor began violently back in 2011 while he was serving in Iraq.
Went out just on a normal daily patrol, and we were on our way back from that mission. And walking down the road, out of nowhere, just been hit by a roadside bomb. My legs were gone. My arm was almost completely severed at the elbow as well. Without a medic there to have morphine, there was no sort of pain medication. So the only thing I could do was scream. By the time I was brought to the trauma bay, they'd revived me. What I found out then was that the real nightmare really was just beginning. Even with the most loving, supporting family, friends, and community behind me, I was the one that was there in the middle of the night, staring at the clock, in pain, in tears, wondering when or if it'll ever get better. With time, the pain started to settle. I regained my strength. I started to regain my mobility. And as I regained my mobility, I started to regain my independence. having over 50 surgeries, hundreds of hours of physical therapy, months on end as an inpatient in the hospital. Not only did I want to practice medicine, but it strengthened my resolve to do it. Over 2 years, I ended up taking, I think, 18 courses. In March of this year, 2017, I got the acceptance that I was hoping to get to my #1 school of choice, that was Harvard Medical School. It's where I met a girl, Jasmine, who eventually is today my fiance, and planning a wedding for next year. So even though I've gone through this journey, I mean, it's not lost on me how unbelievable this ride has been, and how lucky I am to be here. Be patient with difficult times, and even when things may be getting worse for a little while, just be patient and stick it out.
So many incredible real stories of survival, so many good doctors. And Monday, September 25th, you can see the premiere of the new show, The Good Doctor, and meet TV's newest superhero, Dr. Sean Murphy, right here on ABC. And that's our show for tonight. I'm Elizabeth Fargan.